Hello, and welcome to the Data Quality Council's webinar series. My name is John Lehman, and I'll be your moderator today. The title of today's webinar is Defining Data Quality. What standards should we live by? Before we get started, I want to review a few housekeeping items and let you know how you can participate in today's session. Throughout the presentation, we encourage you to interact with our speakers by typing in questions or comments using the question panel on the right side of your screen. We will be collecting your questions and comments during the presentation. We'll be trying to answer them, as many questions as we can during the webcast, but we will certainly get back to you with a response as quickly as we can if we're not able to get it into the recording today. If you'd like to join us on Twitter, you can use the hashtag #DataQuality. The Twitter handle for today's discussion is @DataCouncil. We'd love to have you connect with us on social media and keep the conversation going beyond today's event. Also, we are recording today's session, and we'll make the link to the recording available 48 hours after the event by way of email. Now on to today's event. Leaders from every corner of today's business environment are working to improve the quality of their data. Our mission at the Data Quality Council is to facilitate a collaborative discussions of thought leadership and industry best practices, and help guide organizations navigate data management trends and standards, help develop those standards into working documents, and to really start to elevate the discussion around data quality for all forms of data, online research, lead generation, and online marketing and advertising techniques. Today, we're joined by Mark Menig, the CEO of TrueSample, Joe Jordan, who's the Executive Vice President of Instantly, Lauren Moore is Senior Vice President over at Distillery, which is fantastic, and Frank Kelly, Senior Vice President of Global Strategy at Lightspeed. I'd like to be the first to welcome our host, Mr. Mark Menig, to today's event and turn the program over to him, and let's get started, Mark.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it. And to just reiterate John's welcome to everybody, I wanted to take just a moment and let folks know that are out there that may have been part of the TrueSample Quality Council over the years, something that we started about 8 years ago. It's an exciting transition for us, and we're actually converting our members over to membership in this broader industry initiative around data quality. We saw an opportunity with John and some of his initiatives to really expand the conversation around quality, and it's something that we felt was that important that we could really kind of add some value to that, but also more importantly, provide more value to our customers and all of you out there on the line today to make sure that you have access to the highest quality content, the most up-to-date information around data quality and how it can impact your business, and what's more specifically the actions that you can take to make sure that you feel protected and have the highest confidence in your data. As we go through today, we're going to hear from Joe Jordan, VP of Panel Operations at Instantly. He's going to be talking a little bit about how you individually define quality and talking about some of the challenges that he sees when those definitions differ around the industry and up and down the supply chain. From there, we'll move to Lauren Moore, the VP of Strategy at Distillery. She'll be talking a little bit more about bad data in and bad data out, and how you really have to take action to make sure that you feel protected and controlling for that quality in your data. And then last but not least, we'll be hearing from Frank Kelly, SVP of Global Marketing and Strategy at Lightspeed GMI. And he'll be looking a little bit more into the tactical, actionable aspects of how to execute quality without compromising your ability to field quickly and still deliver against client expectations. And then we'll wrap up with going back to John Lehman, talking a little bit about some of the upcoming programs that you can expect on an ongoing basis from the Data Quality Council, as well as all the different opportunities that you'll have to engage with content, stay up to date on things, as well as actively participate in some of the subcommittees and different things that will be developed to provide some of the best practices for the industry. So with that, I wanted to run through quickly for everybody what the mission of this Data Quality Council is. For those of you that have been a part of the TrueSample Quality Council, this may look somewhat familiar. But it's really taking the ideals of data quality and a collaborative council of industry thought leaders to that next level. So first of all, goal one is leadership. We really want to enable collaboration amongst buyers, suppliers, up and down that supply chain. anybody that is a thought leader and is willing to participate in advancing the conversation around data quality and fraud reduction. Goal number 2 is around collaboration. So really providing that forum to create an organic community that can learn, cross-learn, help each other from one industry to another, apply best practices, and really allow everybody to up-level their understanding and continue to shape the direction of overall online marketing, lead generation, and anything really that touches data. And last but not least, goal number 3, we want to provide an impact. We truly want to achieve objective, quantifiable gains in overall quality, legitimacy of certain methodologies and practices, as well as continue to reduce fraud. And we want to do this across a broad spectrum of industry verticals, because as the world evolves, we're finding there to be a much more mixing of some of the historically siloed verticals. And so we see an opportunity to really provide this forum for leadership, collaboration, and impact in a way that will ultimately benefit all of us, all of our customers, all of our suppliers, which is the goal at the end of the day. So Joe, I'm going to turn it over to you. Would love if you wouldn't mind taking a couple of seconds and introduce yourself, and then take it away from there.
Thanks, Mark. Welcome, everybody. My name is Joe Jordan. I'm the VP of Panel Operations at Instantly. I've had about 20 years of custom market research experience building custom panels on a global scale for media and entertainment industries. Instantly is a market research technology company that provides audiences for research studies and insights tools for actionable consumer feedback. So the first part of this conversation is, what is quality? How do you define quality? Every person along the chain who touches a project or touches data quality has their different perspectives. The client has their expectations of what defines quality in the data set that they're expecting in a research job. Programmers have their own defined expectations of quality of how the survey works and functions, and speed and LOI and skipping and branching within the survey functionality. The sample suppliers have their own unique way to identify unique engaged individual respondents to determine how we could best weed out the fraudulent activity before it even enters into a panel or into your market research study. And then all the other vendors who touch on individual jobs have that same perspective, which is how do we define quality? What does quality mean when you're at the tab stage, when you're at reviewing open ends, when you're creating code frames? All the vendors who are part of a research study are all part of this quality mix as well. So in any case, you have any data collection study or any study being fielded, you're going to have some inconsistent data, hopefully not some fraud, but you're definitely have some questionable quality. And especially when you get into the sample set of the projects that have larger incentives, or if it's a little bit more detailed project, you really need to really focus on what defines quality and what you define as bad data. So I think the first step here is just having clear communication and parameters about what is acceptable data between all the stakeholders. What are your definitions of quality at the forefront of that project before it's even defined, before you even have a request for bid that goes out there? What are you expecting back on the data set? And then making sure that communication is moved all the way along the chain until the final deliverable, so that it's very clear of what you expect the end result to be. Next, Mark. So there's many components to quality and a lot of different factors that everybody touches in the market research industry. It starts off with all the profile information that we collect on each individual panelist, as we call them, or audiences that we have, which is all their basically demographic and behavioral profiles that they give us to who defines our individual audiences: age, gender, ethnicity, geolocation, tendencies and brand awareness and interests. Is also is the key part of it. We also have the behavior profiles and how they interact with our websites or with our surveys. We have the activity profiles about certain functionalities how they participate in the studies, how many times they've sped through a study, how many times they've been kind of flagged as questionable data behind the scenes, so that we can evaluate them and put forth a quality effort so that We can have a monitoring system as well as we move forward into the next mode of data or the next study that they participate in. So we have an activity profile of that individual respondent. Geo-validation is becoming more and more inherent in the mobile industry. So now we have digital fingerprints. Now we have lat and long of everybody's mobile position, so we know if they're in the store or pass through a geo-fence if they've gone to a store at any given time. And then lastly is their digital fingerprint. What is unique, and what's your unique digital fingerprint of the machine you're accessing the survey from? Your PC, your laptop, and especially mobile. So next. So I think there's, I want to define it as there's more like a lifestyle of a life cycle of quality where it kind of flows all the way through the data suppliers, through the programming, and through the processing. So through the data suppliers, the sample companies, or the panel companies, or any phone suppliers, the quality is a direct reflection of the sources that you use to recruit those samples. So trying to make sure that you have legitimate quality expectations for your sources is going to be key. And a lot of times on the supplier side, the technology is the best tool to define the consumer, to define what they are. So behind the scenes, we do a lot of digital fingerprinting, and sample companies do a lot of validation on the technical specifications of that IP address and that geolocation or that device ID of who they really are and what they do, so that we know that they're engaged consumers from every technology point that they can provide for us upon the registration level. Then we go into the programming mode, and either if the study is being programmed or hosted on your side or on the supplier side, there's obviously programming checks that you put in place. The suite of red herring studies to kind of catch fraudulent activity, the black swan portions of the studies to kind of look for unique responses that are just odd and part outside of the norm of what's expected. Then we have data patterns and duplications. So, the pattern checking and the skipping and branching and some of the data pattern checks that we put in place to make sure they're really attentive and interested as they continue on in some of these surveys. And the overall survey experience, including the survey bias, so how the actual survey is written, the wording behind it, is it swaying towards one type of response as opposed to another? So all these pieces have to be kind of considered within the programming phase. So that has to kind of synchronize with the supply of data. And then we also go to the back end of the data processing. So upon fielding, we have the unique data cleaning criteria. So what are the outliers that we feel acceptable? What are the outliers that we don't feel acceptable? I've had some examples in the past where we've gone through the entire data set and we come with the data cleaning process, and I've had conversations with clients and come to find out that they wanted to pull out every single open end that was in Spanish, and I was kind of concerned by that, and I said, well, is that really defining your criteria? Like, oh no, we don't have a way to process that data, so we just don't use that data. So we're just going to eliminate anybody with a Spanish-speaking open end. So if that was defined at the front end, as that was defined as a data criteria and a data quality criteria, myself and all the companies that had touched it and all the vendors that touched that individual project would have been considerate of that particular factor. But at the end result, if that's not part of your expectation, if you don't have the capability to process open-end responses in Spanish and have a translator available to convert that, that needs to be defined, and within all phases. That should have been defined in the way we defined the sample or the audience for that study, should have been defined in the way the programming was written. So that's an example of making sure we have a clear communication of data and quality expectations. So, and the last piece is your data outliers. What is the really extraneous data that you're going to clean and going to remove anyway, and how can we put checks in place throughout the three different phases to make sure that we have as much information as we can on each phase to make sure we're watching for those outliers. So you can move on next, Mark. So I think what we really want to do is align these data quality definitions to one conversation, and that one conversation in one stage really needs to be done when that research project and the parameters are defined. So to make sure that you really have a clear communication as you go through having conversations with your buyers, having conversations with your vendors, we need to make sure that there's a defined expectation on quality and a quality definition. Internally we use more of a, that we have a lifestyle and a behavior profile from all our panelists that validates they're legitimate consumers and they're also attentive and honest. So making sure that we are, guiding that quality from the initial conversation through the bid stage all the way through the final conclusion and the report stage. Quality is inherent and defined and a clear cut along the chain. As I already mentioned before, that audience has to be defined by all the parameters that represent quality within an audience. Language is an example that I just used, but which language is acceptable? What are the open-end criteria that you're going to accept or not accept moving forward? A lot of school of thought goes into anybody who says don't know or NA in an open end is not considered a valid complete and is not a quality respondent. But depending on the way the survey is written, depending on the questionnaire, and depending on the subject matter, it's very possible that some respondents do not have an answer or do not have available answer that fits that particular open end. So it's not necessarily an indication of fraud or an indication of data quality issues. It's just an indication of what's, how do you define that voice of the consumer? How do you define that the needs and expectations of the original research project are met? So next. So I think one thing that I want to iterate is this is kind of becoming a shared responsibility from all the parties involved. So a lot of times the quality expectations and the definitions of quality kind of moved along the chain. We have a certain criteria for quality once we define the sample. Then we get into the programming, and then the quality is kind of different and subjective based on the programmers or based on the programming tools or survey software that is being used, and then lastly on the data quality front. So I think this shared responsibility is kind of encompassing all those different pieces, which includes the clients and the partners and the vendors. They all have to be on the same page. And this possibility of interpretation and subjective analysis of what quality means for the end result and for the end client, that just needs to be brought up at the first stage rather than the last stage as a data cleaning. So it's going to include some conversations and some transparency in all directions, and I think it'd be a great thing to add on your RFQ process as far as when you define your audience, with a sample company or within your vendors. We also have data quality and data criteria and data cleaning expectations as well. So it's just as important as if it's a certain product usage or age or gender or demographic profile of your audience. Defining what the quality represents in that audience is going to be a key factor to contributing to that quality expectation upon delivery of the job. And something that I've been pushing internally as well is a lot of more client feedback and having some more conversations about client feedback. And quality is a two-way street. And if you ask 5 different companies what quality data looks like, everybody's going to give you a different interpretation and their own personal definition of what quality looks like based on the company, based on their particular role. So each one is going to be different, and we as an industry really need to know what is acceptable and unacceptable quality to improve. And as long as we know and can define quality as best we can, we should be able to make some adjustments internally and have open and clear conversation about what quality means. So and that's what is key to the Data Quality Council is making sure that's an open forum for open communication about quality, and making sure we're shedding some light on some of these quality conversations and concerns that everybody has, and we just want to make sure we're having some open communication about that. So I'm going to move this presentation to the next portion, which is Lauren Morris from Distillery.
Thank you. Hi. Hi, everyone on the phone. I'm very glad to be part of this discussion on data quality, particularly bringing it into the ad technology space. I've been playing with data and using data for over 25 years. Prior to getting into ad tech 4 years ago, I was part of market research and ran a global panel which was used for qualitative and quantitative analysis. So I have lots of memories of exactly what Joe talked about, and also of what I know Frank's going to get into. But what I'm going to talk about today is about the massive big data set that exists on the ed technology side, which is used for audience buying and also intelligence. Distillery is a pioneer in this area in terms of using a big data platform to find new audiences for brands and also provide digital intelligence for not only online but offline brands. And as part of our experience in the last 8 years or so in using this data, we've come up with some definite approaches and making sure that we've got good data coming in. Because without good data, then we're going to be making very bad decisions in terms of media buy or in terms of who a brand audience is or where a person really shows up. So our engine is based off of a multitude of layers. Ultimately, right now, we've got about 50 billion signals coming through with different information. And as you can see on the slide here, it shows that we've got browser behaviors that come directly from desktop online. We have device behaviors from smartphone and tablet. We also have device locations, so where are brands, where are stores located, what events are happening, and where are they happening. And in addition to that, we have lat-long coming in through some of the device data that we have. And all of these aspects of data allows us to not only create our models and create our intelligence, but we have to be very careful about what we're using. So I want to tell you a story and how we got into the business of quality performance and making sure that everything we had was correct. About 3 years ago in 2012, our chief scientist noticed that we were outperforming in terms of our models. So we're getting really good conversion rates that really shouldn't have happened in the market. Similar to when you get really great click-through rates on mobile, you got to question where this is coming from. So she's always said to me, it's like, I'm good, but I'm not that good. So what's really going on? And what happened was we, at that point, realized or discovered what some of you might know is referred to as the AlphaBird incident, where there was a huge network, a publisher network called AlphaBird that was basically all bots. And we discovered that by understanding that while we're outperforming, this doesn't seem right, let's go in and look at the data and see what's happening. And what we saw was that we saw the same audience for each website was hugely overlapped. Now that's not common. Now you might be, in Boston, and you might go to Patriots Nation or Red Sox Nation. No, that's maybe a 50% overlap, and that's a pretty huge fan base. What we were seeing is 98% overlap in site usage by the same audience, and that's not normal. So we identified that, and we originally started working with Spider.io, which is now part of Google. And we identified and realized that this is a whole area of non-human traffic that we really needed to start taking care of. Because if we weren't going to take care of it in terms of how we built our models or how do our media buys, then we weren't really buying audience. As you can see, or for those of you who are on this side or in general buying media, there's been a huge outpouring of, hey, fraud. Fraud's a big issue in programmatic, and we need to do something about it. It's true. And we started doing something about it 3 years ago. And in order to handle this correctly, we brought in all our supply side partners, and we talked to them about it. And we talked through, mostly on the tech side, it's like, you guys have bots. You've got non-human traffic coming in, and we're going to create a bunch of criteria that prevents us from using it, but really you should probably clean up your supply. Now, that was on the desktop side. That's true across the board for any data that's coming through now, is you got to make sure that the data that you're seeing makes sense, right? And if it smells bad, it probably is bad. So let's go to the next slide. So on the desktop side, with the work that we've done, working with, we now work with other fraud detection partners out there and brand safety partners out there. We have been able to get our percentage down to 2.1%. This is in a programmatic world where we're bringing in 50 billion signals a day to build models and to do the media buy, where we've been able to push it down to 2%. We are one of the best in our industry. You can compare that to the publishers themselves, which have more, and then to, in general, networks and exchanges that have much more. Inventory quality is key for us. And when we first started making changes to the inventory quality, we took a big hit, as you can imagine, right? Because a lot of times your KPIs are based off of these, brands are basing their KPIs off of a really high rate of return. And if they're working with a partner that is all of a sudden providing them with maybe the realistic return rather than a non-realistic return, guess what? We're going to be cut because there's not an education, or there wasn't an education about what fraud really was costing us as an industry. Can you go to the next slide? Next, sorry. So in addition to figuring out exactly where we play and making sure that everything we do for that behavioral data is really stringent, we have a quality inventory on each bid request that comes through that includes working with integral ad science. It includes working with white ops. It uses our patent, which we have, which detects suspicious overlap. And if we see a device or cookie that has suspicious overlap, we will put them in what we call the penalty box. So that prevents us from using that information from that particular device or cookie for models, but it also prevents us from serving them any type of ad. And that really has allowed us to be very stringent in the way that we're using the data on the behavioral side. Now, it's not just on the behavioral side. Can we go to the next slide? Location. Part of the cross-device modeling that we do is based off of using location data. So when I first started in ad tech, it was with a mobile DMP and DSP. So basically providing data, a data platform, and an ability to buy media programmatically. And at that point in time, the signal coming through for us to buy media was pretty sparse. You had IP address, you had a timestamp, you probably didn't have publisher information, and maybe you had a lat long. And so latitude, longitude, location came through 10 to 15% of the time. For those in the business, it became apparent that lat long was very valuable. And it was a start of hyperlocal targeting in a very strong way. Now, hyperlocal targeting is great, but hyperlocal targeting, or using that information about where a device is and associating it with points of interest, make it a really rich data set. So you've already got your web behavior, right? So you've got your web behavior from desktop and mobile, and then you've got your physical patterns, and you've got your offline behavior. And taking that data and associating it with brands and events is really key. However, there's two things that you need to do in order to make sure that the data is correct. One is, when you're associating lat longs to points of interest, you need to make sure that you accurately identify the point of interest. So in this slide here, basically showing a picture of our platform, which allows us to associate lat longs to a point of interest. And for every, we basically are taking data on the addresses of brands or the addresses of events. We are geocoding them, we're putting them in a database, and we make sure that we accurately identified either the polygon or the centroid of exactly that store. So in this case, originally we were told that this particular Arby's was out in the highway. Well, as you can imagine, if we had created intelligence or modeling off of that, then we'd be wrong. Instead, we go through with either the Turk process or interns and others who are involved and making sure that that centroid is put in the right place. So you can see the original was incorrect, and now we've on the red that is correct. So now we've got this mapping. Well, now we got to make sure that for all the lat longs we associate with that particular area, that they're correct. Let's go to the next slide. Lots of the lat long data is inaccurate. So if you think back 3 years ago or so, 10 to 15% was lat long. It's over 80% now. 80% because it's a really good piece of signal, and you can get more for your impression. So what are you going to do? You're going to start seeing bad data. Now, in this slide, you can see that if you remove the data that's suspicious, then you're going to get rid of all the blue. That's important. Imagine if you were using that. Imagine that if you were actually targeting people there. They weren't relevant. That was not good lat long. It's really important to make sure that the lat long you have coming through is accurate. And there's a couple ways that you can figure that out. If you go to the next slide. So through the data, we go through the data, and we have a couple things that we're doing. We have a blacklist of bad lat longs that we accumulate over time. Now, why would a lat long be bad? Well, sometimes you're creating a lat long based off of a zip code. You're inferring it from a zip code, or you're inferring it from an IP. You're not actually getting it from the GPS. You're not actually using the most accurate signal that you can. Sometimes you might hard code it in the SDK, just because you know you're going to get more money for it. Or it could be inadvertent. We have seen more what we call manhole covers, right, where you have the centroid of the United States. So they just stuck in the centroid of the United States. That's not a true lat long. That's not going to help me do anything for location modeling. We've also seen apps where 2 or 3 devices are providing most of the lat long. So similar to the bot activity that we've seen on the desktop side, you can also see that in some of the apps. And what I think is really cool, although cool in the sense that we found it, is that there's a Superman effect. We've seen devices travel faster than the speed of sound. Now, obviously, we're not traveling faster than the speed of sound. So we remove those. And you take the combination of handling the fraud and bot activity on the desktop side and mobile online behaviors, and handling the location quality and making sure that you're using the right lat long and the right points of interest. That's what enables us to use the right data to create really great models for our brands and intelligence. And this is, most people don't think that this is prevalent throughout industry. That's why I'm glad we're having this conversation. It's not just the market research side. It's not just how people are responding or how a survey is set up. It's also in the big data side that you have to be careful that make sure whoever you're working with is taking care of the quality in this way. Now, I believe that Frank is next. Thank you.
What I'm going to do is pick up essentially where John left off back on the survey side and talk about holistic research quality. So the types of things you need to think about, sort of a checklist of important issues that you need to think about if you're doing online research. So if you would just move on to the next and we'll jump right into it. First of all, one thing that I think is an important factor that people don't think enough of is that there are significant differences in the data that you get based on the source of that data. So research panels, research respondents come from quite a range of different sources. And big companies such as ours, we use all of these sources. Many of our competitors do as well. But we have to be very cognizant of how those different sources provide different types of answers and how we use them in our research offers. So for example, in our case, our primary business is on the DOI research panels, but there's a number of other types of respondent traffic, if you will, that come through as well from things like social media or loyalty programs are a big source of respondents in research these days, and gamers and so forth. We do extensive amount of research every quarter. We reach out to a number of our partners and have them provide us some benchmark survey data with the express purpose of understanding how the data differs, so that we when we do use different partners and different sources, we blend them appropriately. If you can go on to the next slide, I'll show you a couple of some of the differences that we see. So, for example, on important things like smoking cigarettes, and this is in U.S. data, we see from our regular respondent source research panel, we might get about 14% incidence of that behavior versus about 28% from what we collectively group as dynamic sources. And so you can imagine with those kind of differences, you have to be careful if you're doing a smoking study or doing certain types of studies that might be related to it, like, I don't know, air fresheners or whatever, that you have, you understand how the source is going to impact the data. Onto the next slide, you can see that there's also another aspect of the data that gives us a lot to think about, which is that from a research panel, they tend to be a bit more conservative in their rating of product concepts, for example, versus the collective group of dynamic sources historically consistently show a much more optimistic approach to things. Again, if you're considering a research study, the point here is that you really have to be careful that if you're going to be changing suppliers or changing sources of respondents, that you understand that that's going to cause data shifts over time, so that it's not that one is right and one is wrong. When you use a consistent source, you'll get the right answer, I believe. It's just that that you have to be very careful if you are doing a tracking study or any kind of wave study, that you have consistency in the sourcing so that you don't have data shifts, like I said. Okay, on the next slide. So again, the dynamic sources as a group of respondent sources, which would be, again, anything other than the research panel respondents, would collectively tend to need a bit more data quality control. So, they tend to be a little less costly sources of respondents, but we do have to throw out a few extra of them. So, for example, there is, whether or not it's the number of cars that you might, the number of cats you might have, or do you own a kayak? Different questions that we ask that are typically maybe about 2% incidence. We see a bit of overclaiming both on a regular research panel as well as on a dynamic source, but on the dynamic source it tends to be a bit more accentuated. So as a result of that, we tend to kick out some people that fail what we call our honesty detection process. So the data quality is important there as well. The next slide. So those are different things that affect the source of the response, how that affects the data. There's also how the respondents get to the survey and how balanced the sample is. That also has a pretty big impact on the data. So there are two primary ways of bringing a respondent to a survey. One is using a router approach, which involves, typically amalgamating a variety of different respondent sources together, and then pre-screening sort of on the fly and determining, based on the survey quotas, which people get allocated in based on their responses to the screening questions, which people get allocated to which project. That is used pretty extensively. Probably the majority of research is done that way in the industry. And then the more traditional sampling approach, which is typically used with research panels, as well is an approach where a sample is selected specifically for a given project, and that sample is balanced on a range of different variables. The variables that are used for that balancing are typically specific to that project. So for example, if it's a toy study, you want to be very careful that you have a proper balance relative to the age and presence of children. So it gives you a bit more ways to make sure that the sample is representative. On the next slide, I show a couple of examples of this. This would, for example, was two studies we ran which were matched exactly, except that on the left we used a balance sample, and on the right we used essentially the router process, where we let the controls for the sample be tied to just what was in the survey. And so you can see with a balance sample, even without quartering on it, you can, by predicting who's going to start the survey, you can get a much more balanced sample on, in this case, the income and household size variables, which in this case we were doing a retail study. So it was quite important that we get the right balance on those factors because they can influence the choice of retailers and so forth. On the right, the second one was a little bit out of balance on those other variables because essentially every respondent source has an inherent bias to it, whether it be a research panel or any other type of panel. And the survey, if all the different variables aren't balanced that are important, they'll likely skew towards the bias that respondent source has. In this case, the income was a little lower than the national average on this respondent source, so that tends to come in lower because we weren't specifically requiring that it be balanced on that factor. So it's just something to consider when you're doing this type of approach. On the next slide. Also on the survey side, we've, like every company in the business, really believe strongly that more attention needs to be given to designing better surveys. And so what we did here is we just took a typical survey that we had and we ran it two ways, the way that it came into us essentially, and then in a more optimized way, using some of the tools that we've created for this purpose, survey templates and so forth, question templates. And with the express purpose of making sure that the design on the right is actually much more appropriate for various types of small screen devices as well. So on the next slide, you can see essentially we created something called a survey health score, which is just an objective way for us to sense, is this survey good enough? And we rate that score, of course, by type of screen or by type of device. So in this particular study, we took the original survey, we had the scores, this was out of 100 essentially, and that the score is a amalgamation of several factors. The key one being the respondent rating of the survey, but it also factors in such things as dropout rates and other things. So the score then 62 out of 100, 66, 60 out of 100 on the original, and then improving by about 20 points when we implemented some of our survey templates and survey design enhancements to make them a more engaging survey, exact same survey, exact same questions. So there's a lot that can be done by simply doing a nice job on the survey design. But more importantly, most of the companies in this business are getting surveys coming from a lot of different directions. They don't always program themselves. Not everybody is objective on how good their survey is. And so I think it's essential to have a way to measure, compared to other surveys, how does it rate? Is it in the top quartile, bottom quartile? And we can provide that a dashboard and a feedback on that information that I think is useful. The next slide. We also provide I won't go through all these, we're a little short on time, but there are a number of different lists out there for tips for an engaging survey. Think like a respondent. An iterative design approach is one that I don't think people do enough of. People, especially big trackers and big research studies, people think they can get it right the first time and just put it out there, but if they would just be willing to do some soft launches and test different things with 50 or 100 people, they might quickly learn that they could really do a lot to improve a survey before it gets launched and maybe learn some things along the way. If we go to the next slide, it's just one quick illustration of that. So this is essentially a chart that it's an illustration of a typical survey. They're a fairly long survey, and essentially it's a way to just a simple correlation analysis to help us understand how much cross correlation is between the questions and among the questions. So you can see in green there would be relatively little correlation, and yet you see some in red that are quite high correlation. The depth of the color would indicate how high a relationship there is. And what you also notice is as we get further and further into the study, going from left to right, you start to see more and more red, especially down along the diagonal. And that's just an indication of of a 10 to 15 minute study, 15 to 20 minute study. People get to a fatigue point, and then they just kind of start straight lining. So, we recommend doing this type of test on all of our questions from ideally from a soft launch to kind of get an idea, well, what questions could we maybe get rid of? And is the survey too long such that people are getting to the point where they're really not paying attention in the third grid question that comes at minute 15 or minute 17 into the survey. So it's an objective way to assess the quality of the survey from in field. So on the next slide, let me just wrap it up by, again, reiterating some of the things that I pay attention to. First of all, what sample should I use? Again, there's plenty of good sample sources out there, but it's essential to understand the inherent differences among them when in choosing the right one for the type of purpose you have in mind. And then if you think that you might have a project where you might need to blend sources, you may have a very difficult project, then you need to think ahead of time how you're going to be blending it up front, and make sure that the data is tying back to some benchmarks. You have to think about how the sampling process will work. How will respondents get to the survey? Are you balancing on the right variables if you're doing a traditional sample, and if you're doing a router sample, are you putting the right things in the survey quotas that will ensure that you have a sample that is appropriate for the purpose you're pulling. Of course, you need a way to ensure that all of the devices that people want to use are going to be represented, because we do know that there are skews to the types of people that use particular devices for collaborating with us on surveys. So we want to have a sort of a device agnostic approach to things. One of the biggest I believe things that people do wrong is that there is a tremendous amount of redundancy. We hear that from our respondents as well. They're saying, why do you keep asking me the same question, more or less over and over again, with slight variations. But, all too often when we look at the data, we don't need a lot of those questions. So we need to shorten our surveys, certainly, and the best way to do it is by getting rid of the redundant questions. And then, again, I think another thing is to make sure, don't trust your own judgment. Check what the respondents think about your survey. If they think it's a bad survey, you're probably going to get bad data. And if you have a good survey, you should be rating in the top, third at least of the survey health score. So that's a quick rundown on a few of the things that I like to focus on. I'd like to send it back to John Lyman, if we could, at this point.
Fantastic. I'd like to try to see if I can't just kind of bring it back to, well, what is the Data Quality Council now? How is it going to be developed, and what is going to be the participation or kind of the scope of the work? And so I'll back up a little bit by simply saying that most of you may know of us through Survey Magazine and Market Research Bulletin and our hosting of supplier directories, where we're matching up suppliers and purchasers of survey services. We've been really successful over the years of kind of really fine-tuning a model about how do we really develop out communities, how do we disseminate and distribute content that we think is meaningful and it really advances the thought leadership around an industry. And so Data Quality Council, Mark came to me not long ago with the idea, how do we broaden the appeal, the distribution, the community building around this, so it becomes more of an industry-wide community. And so this is what we've come up with. And you'll notice here that this slide we're really not changing the core value of what Mark Menig had started with the TrueSample Quality Council. Leadership, collaboration, and impact. This is core to our strategy. We just heard, from three fantastic speakers, two of which were speaking in research quality, and then Lauren came in with some information from, big data and from the marketing and advertising space. And with each one of those short presentations, I think what you saw, especially with Frank, he very, very quickly showed an example of what a project quality checklist might be, or tips for survey design. And we're working in an industry that is essentially self-regulated. And when you do that, we're primarily reliant on the competitive nature of private business to really drive quality. And that's a very effective way to do that. I think that in this case with data quality that we really recognize a need in the market to work more collaboratively to build a community around data quality and broaden that scope. So here you can see that what we've done essentially is we're working as a facilitator. So think about this as your community. You'll hear me speak about open source a lot. And I truly mean open source, that it's not a publisher who's pushing out an opinion. This is really open source in the sense that people are contributing to the community, and we're simply distributing and really building communities around this particular topic of data quality. And so initially we've scoped out some areas of interest where we think that we can build out communities and forums or committees actually around specific items like data quality, data fraud, or data analytics, data insight, for example, and big data. Those are all big, no pun intended, but they're very big areas of activity. And I think that within each one of those categories, there's just a ton of opportunity for us to think about how do we develop out something that can emerge into a best practice or into a standard. And that's what we're here to do for you, is to help you facilitate that process through a ready-made committee. And so on to the next slide, if you could, Mark, that'd be helpful. So we're really, just based on our core services of our own company here and the work that we've been doing for years, we specialize in these items here. And so our work for Data Quality Council is really to help form committees and design forums and disseminate the information. One of the big, I think, opportunities that you'll hear us talking about, and then today is actually this first starting point of that, is an open source standard development program where we have a process where we'll walk you right through and have a ready-made committee and a collaborative process of industry leaders that can really improve the perspective of an industry-wide perspective of data quality or whatever topic that you may want to put forth or work on. The council, we've developed individual and corporate memberships, and so on the individual basis, it's very free. Corporate memberships, you'll find that we're working with corporate sponsors of data to fund webinar programs, to fund events, and to fund much larger type scopes of disseminating the information. You'll find that we have an e-learning process that will be shortly launched. One of the things that we've been doing a lot for many years are webinars and e-newsletters. So you'll find the Data Quality Council will have a weekly e-newsletter based on contributions that you as a community are forwarding to us. And you'll see a call to action to that as we get towards the end of our presentation here. On the right side of our slide here, you'll notice we have a cover of a magazine, and this is one thing that I think that we're just really excited about. We've titled a new digital magazine called Data Aficionado, and it's no mistake that we're really taking a high-end approach to data quality, and we're really excited about our first issue of Data Aficionado. We actually launch on October 21st, and it'll be the premier publication that is actually being shared at the Kantar Media event on October 4th, or October 21st, actually, in New York City, and so look for us there at Kantar Media, and that's going to be our opening date for Data Aficionado. It's really a fabulous publication. It's digital, which has all of the fancy opportunities for measurement and understanding how people are interacting with the content. We still have space available in our first issue of Data Aficionado, so feel free to give us a call. We're taking in some editorial content and obviously some display advertising and some showcase and cover opportunities if any of your companies are interested in that. So also, please don't think of this as just kind of a 9 to 5 resource or solution provider. We do have the 24-hour capability, so think of us as there's a support forum. There's a lot of times when we start thinking about standards or development of ideas that, sometimes those don't come between 8 and 5, and so you give us a call and we can start working in a supportive way to build a committee or a forum around your ideas and really work towards communicating something pretty effective. So, okay, Mark, you can head to the next slide. I wanted to spend just a few moments on the idea of an open source standard development program. And so this is a program that we've put in place that essentially allows you as a committee member or as anybody that's working either as an individual or as a company to put forth a document, an idea of where you think data quality should be heading, what your idea of data quality is. And maybe that's around big data, maybe it's around research quality or some of the other areas that we described earlier, like analytics and infrastructure, storage, things of that nature. Through the Data Quality Council, again, you'll have a ready-made committee that can work with you in a collaborative nature. So what we're asking is submit your ideas to us. We've got a process that can take an idea developed into a memorandum of understanding. We can distribute to a committee for review. There's some draft preparation of how a formal document or a standard may be developed. And then we do another distribution round for peer review of that idea or standard or best practice. And then we go into an approval process of the committee and the people in the industry that have meaningful stakeholder positions. And then we've got a process where we can actually ratify it as a data quality standard and really kind of implement it and have as a resource for the industry to utilize, to leverage. And as we look at collaboration, we just think that there's such an opportunity to communicate this information, but have it a collaborative message so that people can really use it as a resource. So, okay, Mark, I think that what we'd like to do now is I want to take you on a very quick tour of our website, and that's I promise you it will only take a few minutes. We won't spend a lot of time doing this, but if you pass we'll see this presentation come over, and there we go. So what you're looking at here is essentially dataqualitycouncil.com, and it's for those of you that know us around Survey Magazine and Market Research Bulletin. This is essentially a duplication of our core faculties, of our core kind of competency about how do we really scope out an area of interest and look at distributing out information for that. And so just to get you kind of gathered around the idea, the scope of the Data Quality Council that we communicated on our first slide essentially is outlined here. These are categories. As you know, most of these sites are set up that way. So as you can submit information on data quality or on analytics or on insights, we'll take that information and we'll post it to this particular website, and you'll see that is happening already. And here we've got a data supplier who's offering some information. In this particular case, it's a news piece around an event that happened this past week. And what you'll find is that we'll be essentially using this as a forum to communicate news, best practice, supports, and things of that nature. And they're all categorized. And so there are a couple of these categories that are fairly large. And so we've put them into smaller segments. So within infrastructure, you can see we have storage, warehousing, cloud computing, and such. These are all areas that we can provide support on and help communicate your message and develop out best practices and standards and communities. So I think that what would probably be also very helpful is I'd like to show you where you can find some of the resources at the top of our menu bar up in this area. So we've got some areas that are already active. We have an individual member directory that it's free to join, and we would ask you to do that. It's a very simple process, and this is integrated with your social media profiles that you probably already have in place, and we haven't even actually got out and promoted this yet, but you can see that we've got a pretty meaningful set of people that have found their way here and signed up. And so, and in fact, if we were to take a look at our friend Dave Walker down here from Ipsos, a senior level executive who's going to be part of, the dissemination of information around research quality, where he's, opted into the data quality and research quality forums, and so he's going to be a resource for you to access and get input from through this free membership, individual membership, and will help that process along. So the way that you do this, the way that you come into this particular individual directory, is simply go to the members login up at the top right corner of the page. We have a short little welcome video that explains the same process that I'm explaining to you now. And you can simply just fill in your information, register. When you get down to the community forums, we've actually established 3 or 4 forums already, and you can essentially select those forums that you want to participate in, either as a community, a committee, or even starting to draft out some of the best practices. So there's also this page that we were just talking about around developing out our standards and our best practices. And so this particular page on our website essentially is an outline of how you can submit a memorandum of understanding and start the process of communicating with other stakeholders in the industry around best practices, and whether or not a committee that is well vested in your practice area can really have input on whether or not that should be a actual best practice, or should it be a standard that we can develop into a larger program and roll it out for a ratification process. And so on this page, you can see that we've outlined that process. I would say that this will probably change over time, but it's a great framework to start the process as we build up the community and get people involved with the Data Quality Council. Again, our primary focus is staying very true to the original core values of what Mark Menig and the TrueSample Data Quality Council began with, of collaboration, of leadership, and having an impact, doing something that's significant. And so I think that over time you're going to see that happening. You're going to see more content coming out in the form of e-learning and webinars, and certainly with our flagship publication now that it will launch this month with Data Aficionado. I'm absolutely certain you're going to love it. It's going to be something that we're very proud of, and I know that you'll enjoy it as well. So I think with that, Mark, I'll see if we can go back to our last slide there. And so this actually kind of gets towards the end of our webcast today. You've heard me say it before, but this is open source. This is not our community. We're not pushing publishing services on you. What we really want is your contribution, your collaboration. Bring your thought leadership and let us help you distribute it. Let us connect you with other leaders within the industry, and let's start to form some meaningful best practices, some standards. Let's share some of this information. I think at this stage, in many of the data-related businesses, that the competitive nature of the industry will always run its course, but there's always a place for some collaboration. Always we're going to find something positive that comes out of that process, and our job here is to facilitate that. So please look at this slide really as a call to action. Generate an MOU. I know that many of you are out there with thousands of different ideas around how to do something better. Submit it to us. Let us take it and get it into a committee format, move it into a process that can actually become a standard, a best practice, and be ratified through a committee review process. And so start a committee. I mean, we've outlined a few areas of interest, from analytics to big data to storage and obviously research quality. But we may not have all of them outlined appropriately, and you may have some ideas that are a very good fit in terms of moving the conversation around data quality. So start a committee, contact us, and let us know that that's something that you want to do, and our job then is to help facilitate that for you. I would always urge you to subscribe to our newsletter, and of course, Data Aficionado is going to be a product that we're very proud of. I know that you'll enjoy that as well. So you can find the subscription forms on the website. Um, you know, start today by submitting your thought leadership. Many of you that are listening today have authored white papers, have authored meaningful pieces that, you know, they end up in a PDF document, and they're stored somewhere on some website or in some company, you know, infrastructure. Let's get out that strong, you know, thought leadership, that stuff that really generated idea and interaction. Let's get it back in distribution and put something meaningful behind it. So this is a place that you can do that. Again, we went over a little bit around the standards development process, and the presentations that we had today really touched on research quality. And as you heard, some of the messaging out of the three presentations with Frank, you know, offering up a list of survey design ideas, or a checklist of some of the data quality or some of the research quality things that you need to consider. Those can very easily then be developed into these memorandums of understanding, to a best practice, and move through a standardization process and get some ratification. So I would encourage you to think about those opportunities, send them to us, and we will put a community around them. We will get some interaction around them, and we will help you put your stamp on this industry. So there's some contact information here at dataqualitycouncil.com. You can go there to join that directory. Obviously, if you want to be part of Data Aficionado as we launch in October, please give us a call. My email's here at the bottom. And I want to, you know, personally thank everybody for attending. I think we're right up against, we probably even went over a little bit of time here, but thank you for your patience. And in advance, I'm thanking you for your contribution. This is something that we've been very effective at with our survey magazine, and I know that in this particular space of data, that we're just going to have a fabulous community as we begin to broaden it from, you know, the success that Mark has had over the years. So with that, you know, I'd like to thank you for joining us. You'll be receiving an email alert probably within the next 24 hours that will inform you on the on-demand version of this webcast, and that. So if there's any material that you think that you may have missed, you'll have access to that, and we'll get an email out to you shortly with all of that information. You know, on behalf, especially Mark Menig, for his contribution initially to get this Data Quality Council started, his interest in moving it beyond the TrueSample brand and really into an industry collaboration is really noteworthy, and I want to thank Mark publicly for his efforts to do that. Joe Jordan, Lauren Moores, and Frank Kelly, thank you very much for putting forth some great ideas, and we'll look forward to those to come forward to put them in this process, and let's start working these ideas through into something meaningful. Thank you for joining. We'll be in touch shortly with more emails, and thank you for your time. Have a great day.